The L.A. coroner has announced that Michael Jackson was murdered. Is that correct?
That's right. The L.A. coroner has announced that his death is a homicide because he's revealing the information that there was now found to be lethal doses of the anesthetic known as Propofol, which we've been talking about for a while, in Michael Jackson's bloodstream. Propofol being a very powerful sedative. It's white in color, and anesthesiologists refer to it as the milk of anesthesia because of its color. It's very powerful, and generally only anesthesiologists are supposed to be giving this drug.
Okay. From what I understand, Conrad Murray, who was the private physician for Michael Jackson, said that he only gave him 50 milligrams of Propofol. I mean, 50 milligrams is barely a dose that you would use on a 90-year-old lady who you were doing a colonoscopy on. So how could that be a lethal dose?
Well, Dr. Gittemel, you're more in the know of me because you go in with anesthesiologists every day. Let me just say that it's a combination of things. First of all, as you're hinting at, you might use 250 milligrams of Propofol to induce anesthesia. But the problem here is that, A, the person giving it wasn't an anesthesiologist, and B, it's also clear that there was a buildup of Propofol in his system. So even if he gave 25 to 50 milligrams on a one-time dose at 1:30 a.m., as was reported, there was also Ativan found in his system and Versed. So the combination of those sedatives, Versed, which is like a Valium-like drug, or Ativan, they suppress breathing, too. So in addition to these two drugs suppressing breathing, on top of that, you're giving Propofol, and you're not an anesthesiologist. Maybe you gave it too rapidly. It's hard to know. So it's not just the total dose that matters. It's who's administering it, how much experience they have, and how rapidly they're administering it.
Now, Mark, this is Nader. I just wanted to say that for everyone listening, that these drugs are not inherently dangerous. I mean, if you're having, for example, today I was doing surgery, and a couple of the patients asked the anesthesiologist if they're going to be getting Propofol, and they were very worried that they're going to die. So, these drugs are safe if used in the right hands, and when you go to get anesthesia, they're typically administered very safely.
That's a great point. That they're actually, it's so true that with colonoscopies, for example, I mean, people have used that to replace Valium and Demerol. It's such a commonly used drug, and it's so safe in an anesthesiologist's hands. But there's no situation where anyone other than an anesthesiologist should be giving it, certainly not a non-board certified cardiologist, but never a non-anesthesiologist. But your point is right. In an anesthesiologist's hands, a completely safe drug.
All right. And then the other question I had is, so I think that the other issue is the other drugs that he was taking. Why don't you just tell us what those drugs were?
Well, the two that were found that the coroner... Now, let me give a little background on this information. The information we're actually receiving today that's new is, A, the coroner is now ruling this a homicide, and B, they're releasing the information on the warrant that was issued a few weeks ago to search Conrad Murray's office. It's that warrant that's revealing this information, and specifically that Murray injected Jackson with Ativan, then injected him with Versed, and then Jackson, still unable to sleep, urged him to give him Propofol. So after giving him Valium and after giving him Ativan and then Versed, he then gave him the Propofol. So that's the point I'm making. All four of those drugs suppress respiration. They all suppress breathing. And you have to know what you're doing to use even one of them. But the combination increased the likelihood that he would stop breathing.
And Mark, he was treating him basically for not being able to sleep, right? That was the problem. It wasn't that he was in pain or he was having an operation or anything like that,
well,
right?
Clearly, we've heard a lot of talk about whether he was in chronic pain, but clearly these drugs were not being used for that. The combination of anxiety and insomnia would be my suspicion. He clearly had an insomnia. He was an insomniac, but on top of that, he had a lot of ongoing anxiety. But again, our listeners should know that this is, though these drugs are themselves inherently safe if being used properly, they're not safe in the fashion that they were given.
Okay, I just had a question, Mark. At what point does compassionate use to try to allow Jackson to go to sleep and just at least attempt to carry on his normal life as he can carry on switch to murder?
That's a really good point here, Ramesh, because he's ruling the death of homicide, but nobody's been accused of murder yet.
So what's the difference between homicide and murder?
Well, it's likely, and of course I'm not an attorney, and nor are you, but it's likely that it's going to be ruled a manslaughter rather than murder. But
okay, in any case, at what point does it switch to compassionate use becomes criminal?
Yeah, it becomes criminal when there's an intent made to do harm or to. Boy, this is a really tough question. I'm going to have to defer this. We'll have to get a different because the point here is I don't know that anyone involved was deliberately attempting to. We don't know the facts about whether someone involved was deliberately intending to murder him. We don't know that. Mm-hmm. I think we should leave it as a lethal dose without figuring out what the intent was. We don't have those facts yet. I think it's likely someone's going to be criminally charged here, by the way. But your point is an excellent one, which is what was Conrad Murray thinking? What was Dr. Murray thinking at the time that he gave these injections? We don't know.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Mark, is it documented in his records if there was any monitoring being done? In other words, when he was treating Michael Jackson for this insomnia, was he monitoring him with a heart monitor or pulse or respiration or oxygen saturation or any of those kind of things?
My understanding is that the answer to that is no, which again increases the likelihood of there being a criminal negligence here. By the way, the point you're making, Nadir, again, as someone that operates every day, you cannot give Propofol without oxygen. It's just not something that an anesthesiologist would ever do, in addition to the advanced monitoring equipment. My understanding of the situation is that he was not under advanced monitoring, heart rate, blood pressure monitoring, and that he was not receiving oxygen at the time.
So I think one of the take-home messages is that drugs can be dangerous, but I think the other take-home message is that a dose that might be safe at a low level is not safe when you start mixing drugs. And this becomes a message for all the listeners. For example, if you're drinking and then taking some medication that you might think might be safe, and then you add it with a little alcohol, next thing you know, you've got a problem.
Yeah, I would add one final point, which we've made now, which is our listeners know that we have great specialists on Dr. Radio talking on different topics. They're not interchangeable. So whereas a medication for one type of doctor is safe, it is not safe for another type of doctor. This is why you don't do your own anesthesia.
Right.